Shinobu Sensui, the greatest villain to come out of any shonen manga in my opinion, and the best villain in Yu Yu Hakusho, and one of the greatest villains in anime, if not the greatest villain in all of anime. Sensui was the main villain in the Chapter Black Saga, and his introduction, execution, and conclusion were all done extremely beautifully. Sensui was someone with an extreme sense of justice, someone who viewed the world in a black and white sense, right and wrong, a very simple way of thinking, which would eventually lead to a deep change in him and cause him to develop a new state of mind, or minds in Sensui's case. Now let's dissect Sensui, his purpose, and the role he played during the Chapter Black Saga. Now when I say Sensui is one of the greatest, if not the greatest villain in Shonen, I truly mean it. In my opinion, the only villain that rivals him is Pain. Sensui's character was beautifully written and executed throughout the entirety of the Chapter Black Saga. His introduction in the saga set the tone for his whole character and was amazing to see. We got this spine-chilling moment where his mind was read, and this immediately set the dark tone for the entirety of the arc. Not only for Sensui's character, Murota, the one who read Sensui's mind, felt completely trapped and was petrified and feared by just reading Sensui's mind. And this already gave us clear insight into what direction Sensui's character would be taken into. The introduction of his character was done perfectly, and this was beautiful, and it immediately told us that Sensui would be this dark and intimidating presence throughout the whole saga. Now on to the execution of Sensui's character. Togashi did Sensui's character extreme justice. Let's analyze Sensui. Sensui was chosen by Koenma to become a spirit detective, and this was the perfect job for someone like Sensui. He had a great sense of justice and a very simple thought process. Demons were evil and needed to be eradicated, and the humans were to be protected, simply because Sensui himself was a human. Sensui lived by this notion while he was spirit detective, and his whole world was twisted when he saw the evil that humans were capable of. Seeing the ones he was supposed to protect brutally torture the ones he was supposed to eradicate completely turned his world upside down. Sensui went on a rampage and killed every human present, and this resulted in a deep psychological change within Sensui. Because of this heinous act, he simply couldn't accept the fact that he did something like this, and he needed to cope with it somehow. So he came up with his defense mechanism, which resulted in the creation of his different personalities. And this right here is what separates Sensui from any other villain. Sensui's mind and mental state made a complete shift upon realizing his whole view on the world was not the way it seemed. Like I said earlier, Sensui's act that day caused him to create different personas because he simply couldn't handle the fact that he, Shinobu, would do such an act. Sensui truly believed himself to be innocent, which is why he referred to himself as the Black Angel. But the blame for these acts that Sensui did, he wanted to shift them somewhere else. So he created Kazuya, specifically one of his 7 personalities. Kazuya specifically is his violent personality with an awful tongue and extremely intimidating demeanor. Sensui proceeded to create 5 more personalities, resulting in his 7 personalities, each representing one of the 7 deadly sins, which I'll get back to later. Oddly enough, he gathered 6 psychics to join him and created a group called the Sensui 7, wherein each of them represent a deadly sin, a part of his own personality, a piece of the whole. That remind you of someone? Crollo. After that incident, Sensui pursued the chapter Black Tape, and his whole outlook on humans changed after watching it. A tape documenting all of humanity's darkest hours and a recording of all evil they did in the world, where all of it was unjustified. The ones who were to be protected now became his target for extinction. Sensui's goal now was to open the tunnel to Demon World, allowing demons to be able to pass through to human world easily and have them wreak complete havoc upon humans and wipe them out of existence. But his goal and ideology ran much deeper than that, and people don't seem to understand that, and I'll get to that in a minute. Sensui, seeing the true evil that humans were capable of and actually experiencing it firsthand, he decided it was time for the humans to be completely annihilated. No human was to be left alive. Every last one of them was to die. Women, children, the elderly, everyone. A true believer in equality and the equal rights movement. Since we didn't discriminate, can't be racist if you hate them all. After seeing what humans did to demons, and after watching the Black chapters, he realized that the true disgust lied within the humans. He saw that demons indulged in their true nature and didn't try to hide anything and just accepted who they were. That's why they did bad. While humans played this role of goodwill and acted like the greatest beings, but deep down, they can be the most malicious creatures ever. Sensui simply hated this and concluded that all humans must die. Now back to Sensui's psychological change. After killing the humans who tortured the demons, Sensui created these different personas for himself, and let's analyze his different personas. The personality he uses the most, Minoru. Minoru represents pride, as we see how his behavior as Minoru reflects that in his battle with Yusuke. Kazuya, which is pretty obvious, represents wrath, as he was the persona Sensui shifted most of his blame towards. And another one of his personas, which is a woman, which I found very interesting, called Naru, which represents lust. Stated by Itsuki, his Naru personality is very poetic and has a beautiful way of speech, and she has the most pity for humans, and she holds Sensui's most non-violent emotions. But she understands that humans have to die as a result of their sins. But his main personality, his true personality, Shinobu Sensui, is the angel and someone who truly believes what he's doing is complete justice. This personality doesn't come out until almost the end of the chapter Black Saga, and it was stated that he hasn't come out in months. More into Sensui, we see his meeting and interactions with Yusuke, which was then the driving point for his character as a whole. Seeing someone who had the same job as him in the past but be so different from him is what's beautiful about this. It's what's beautiful about Sensui's character. Yusuke saw Sensui as this completely deranged psychopath, while Sensui saw Yusuke as a complete idiot who understood nothing. Sensui displayed that he was someone to be feared. Aside from the fact that he was dangerously powerful and no one at the time stood any chance of defeating him, except for Koenma, but Sensui found a way to outsmart him. And the execution of his character was extremely beautiful, because as we saw in his introduction, we're given this dark demeanor by Sensui. Then we come to understand what brought him to this point and why he does what he does. Eliminating all humans is the only way he saw fit for repentance for every act he's done and every act humans have done. Sensui isn't simply some villain who saw humans as these weak creatures and just because he can will eliminate them. He was truly disgusted with his own kind and decided that all their actions must result in the ultimate consequence, utter annihilation. And like I said earlier, his ideology ran much deeper than that, which we'll get to in Sensui's conclusion. Now, just like the other parts of Sensui's character, the conclusion of Sensui was just beautiful. Beautifully written, beautifully done. To see Sensui killing Yusuke knowing that no one can possibly stand in his way at this point, his victory just seemed assured. But Yusuke coming back with the power of the Mazoku is what truly went more into depth of Sensui's mind. After that final battle with Yusuke, we got to understand more about Sensui, aside from the fact that he completely toyed with Hiei, Kurama, and Kuwabara, and even Yusuke after his awakening. After his defeat, we saw the true side of Shinobu Sensui. We now see that for a long time now, Sensui was dying with a deadly disease which greatly weakened him and would kill him in the next 2 weeks. Even with all of this going on, Sensui was still pursuing his goal, which I found very impressive. And Sensui's final speech gave us complete insight into his character. Sensui stated that he always killed demons and grew to hate them simply because they wanted him dead. But he never gave them a chance to state their reason. He never gave them a chance to speak as to why they did what they did. He acknowledged that he saw it as simply as demons being bad and humans being good, and never stopped to question any of it. They were similar to him. They saw themselves as bad, so they did bad. And when Sensui saw that humans could be even worse than demons, his whole world fluctuated. Sensui wanted to get into demon world and see life through the eyes of a demon. He wanted to die by the hands of a demon as repentance for everything he did to them in the past. Sensui never tried to make any excuses for the things he did. He just accepted them. He wanted to die by their hands and in their home. As we saw the execution of Sensui's character, our own morality is tested because we start to question, was Sensui actually wrong? And that's what makes a great villain. Seeing Sensui go through everything he did was beautiful, and he is easily one of the greatest written villains ever. Sensui envied Yusuke because of his own strong sense of justice. He caused himself so much suffering. But the whole time, Sensui might have been the victim of his own story, a victim of his own mind. What Sensui was trying to do was wrong, but he needed closure for everything he did, and dying by Yusuke's demon hands was that closure. Togashi did so much justice to Sensui's character, and Sensui has easily gone down as one of the best villains to come out of a shonen manga. His introduction, his execution, his backstory, his conclusion, everything written to perfection. Sensui understood himself, his true self, but everything he pursued was done out of the intent that consequences must be dealt for by the actions of the past. We see Sensui shift from being the antagonist to being the protagonist in the way. but Sensui always perceived himself to be the antagonist of his own life. So I ask you this, was Sensui actually wrong?